Hello and welcome to the PvE-Gamer. Today we are talking about Flesh and Blood and speculate on PvE. As always, everything we say is pure speculation at this point. There's no detailed information about Flesh and Blood PvE out yet, other than that it will target casual players and be a fun experience for everyone. It is February 10th, 2023, but we won't hold back on speculating on what PvE might bring, and this guy, Bravo Star of the show, is known to be overpowered and he's living legend already in PvP. So today we're asking the questions: will there cards in PvE which are overpowered, and will that result in multiple difficulty levels being available for the game in PvE? So let's first take a look at some cards. For example, this one, Is That All You Got? Love the flavor text, by the way. If only they were all as pathetic as you, Victor Goldmain. Great stuff here. If we look at the card, Is That All You Got? The main drawback is usually you have to know that there is an attack incoming with attack 2 or less. So you can draw a card with this defense reaction. But in PvE, if we get real player versus environment and we play against a predefined deck, we know what is in the deck and we know if it is worth to play Is That All You Got. So this could be a very good card. And this is only one of the not that good examples in comparison to everything. Everyone will have this card on the radar by now. Of course, we're talking about Coax a Commotion. If Coax a Commotion hits, choose a number. Each hero creates a quicken token, each hero draws a card, or each hero gains a life. This will be an absolute powerhouse in PvE. If it is true PvE, if we can play it, it costs 0 attacks for 4, and it lets all heroes benefit. What can you say? This card was very cheap when it was released in Crucible of War Unlimited, and it has risen since. Of course, also this rounds on me, more recent from Everfest. Each hero draws a card, and until the start of your next turn attacks the target, you have -1 attack and go again for 1 with a blue. Again, extremely powerful in PvE. Each hero who's your friend draws a card. But it gets even more ridiculous. Oh, well, not more ridiculous, but even ridiculous on the same level. We have the Gorganian Tome. And usually the drawback in PvE is that if you play this and your opponent plays one, your opponent draws more cards than you because you already have a Gorganian Tome in the graveyard. But if everyone cooperates, this card only gets better when there are already other Gorganian Tomes in the graveyard. So imagine in a 4-player game, you might draw 4 cards from this for 0 with Go Again as a generic action. Congratulations. And we have the Great Library of Solana, a card which I find is still very cheap to get. It's about 140 bucks at the moment in Europe. So I don't know why I'm saying bucks. It's about 140 euro in Europe. Sometimes you get it a bit cheaper even in the Unlimited edition. It will get a reprint in History Pack 2. I don't know how many reprints we will see. We have seen legendaries which are very commonly available, which is in my opinion a very good thing, that the Emperor, for example, is rather cheap to get, being nominally a legendary. This is a fabled. I don't know how often they are going to reprint the fabled, but in my personal opinion, it is still a rather cheap card at the moment in foil and black border. But more importantly, the ability is of course very strong. If a hero has 2 or more cards with a yellow color stripes in their pitch zone, they gain +1 intellect until the end of turn. So if you coordinate on playing a game where you abuse this fact and abuse the card draw, you obviously get a very high amount of value from this. So why do I think there will be different difficulty levels, and why do I think there will be different difficulty levels according to the power of card draw with these examples? There's extreme potential in this. In Flesh and Blood you discard cards to pay for costs. More cards give you more opportunities and give you more choices and selection. So card draw is really strong in Flesh and Blood, and usually it is a drawback. If we take a look at this rounds on me, it is very interesting because in UPF the effect is very bad. Each hero draws a card, and each one who is your opponent now has more options and more resources. But in PvE and in a cooperative environment, this is a very different story. So these cards will be the cause, I think, for different difficulty levels. Why? First of all, if you don't have different difficulty levels, and let's say they make the game so hard that you need these cards, then they will have a cost explosion. They will be very expensive, and the only way to mitigate that would be by increasing the availability a lot. So white bordered reprints and on and on. This is not impossible, but I don't think this is what will happen. They can limit the number of times you can play this card. Gorgarian Tome is already legendary, Great Library of Solana is already legendary, Coaxer Commotion and this rounds on me are not legendary, so you could play them a lot of times. But this becomes a different story if they introduce a Highlander format. For example, what we know from Magic the Gathering and Commander, you can only play every card or any card only once each one time, and you have to have a 100 card deck. So deck size might also be a way to mitigate the power level for PvE. If you have to play 100 cards and you can only play one Coaxer Commotion, it gets very reasonable to acquire one, and the power level is also a bit diminished by that, by diluting the possibility of getting it. So what they could introduce also is a banned and restricted list. But we'll discuss this in an own video, because there are also heroes which might be on such a banned and restricted list, and it would be very unfortunate for PvE if you couldn't play what you have, especially because it is a casual and fun format. But I think what could work very well is introducing different difficulty levels. So, for example, imagine you want to introduce friends to Flesh and Blood. You already have your own collection, but you were focusing on one hero, like Ninja, and now they want to play Mechanologist. So what we are getting now in preparation for, also for PvE, I think, is we are getting blitz decks for a lot of heroes. We're getting blitz decks for every hero, effectively. And we need a way for PvE to just pick up these blitz decks and get started playing. That is very important, because you have to have a low threshold on getting interested in the game. So I think there will be a difficulty level that just says, this is easy. You can beat the game with blitz decks. And obviously, if you can beat the game with blitz decks, they will not pose a challenge with better cards from your collection. So I think there could be 3 levels. This could be a way to do it. I'm not saying there will be 3 difficulty levels, but it would be reasonable, I guess, because you can then introduce a second level with deck building and good availability for Majestics. Most of the Majestics you can buy are very reasonably priced. It isn't too hard to get your favorite deck together and give it a medium power level for, let's say, a normal difficulty. And then you could have a hard mode or hardcore mode for players who want to play with their maximum power level and maximum strength. You could compare this to World of Warcraft and online MMORPGs. There is something similar in place, so you get better gear in harder dungeons, but effectively for experiencing the game, that doesn't do anything for you. So if you are the best player and have the very best equipment for Diablo 4 or World of Warcraft, you're still raiding the same dungeons. This hasn't always been true for games like World of Warcraft, where there was raid content which you could only enter by having appropriate gear. But for games like Diablo 4, the content doesn't change, so you can experience the endgame content rather quickly, but there is still a challenge and reward in beating the hardest level. And this could also be the case for Flesh and Blood here. That's all for today on difficulty levels. Join us next time when we talk about a class you wouldn't expect to be talked about for PvE.